Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're uncovering the incredible story of Bletchley Park. Now, on the surface, this was just a quiet, picturesque Victorian mansion out in the English countryside. But behind closed doors, it secretly helped win a global war. We're going to explore exactly how this seemingly ordinary, everyday estate completely transformed into the absolute nerve center of Allied intelligence and, casually pioneered the dawn of modern computing along the way.
British Prime Minister Winston Churchill actually used these exact words to describe the incredibly dedicated staff at Bletchley Park. The geese that laid the golden eggs and never cackled. Think about that. They were producing this world-altering intelligence, the golden eggs, all while maintaining absolute unbreakable silence. The stakes were literally life and death.
Here is our agenda for today. First, the ultimate war secret. Then, gathering the codebreakers, cracking Enigma and Tunny, the impact of ultra, post-war secrecy and decline, and finally, legacy and modern museum.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the ultimate war secret.
So back in 1938, this mansion and its 58 acres of land were dangerously close to being scooped up by a builder for a housing estate. But Admiral Sir Hugh Sinclair, who was the head of MI6 at the time, saw a massive opportunity. The government basically told him they didn't have the budget for it, so Sinclair actually bought the site using £6,000 of his own money. He chose it for a very specific reason: its strategic geography. It sat right alongside the railway line connecting the brilliant minds at Oxford and Cambridge universities. Plus, it was super close to high-volume telegraph and telephone links. It was, without a doubt, the perfect undercover base.
But here is a truly wild fact. Before the famous Codebreakers even took over, the site was used by Section D, which was this covert paramilitary outfit specializing in sabotage. They set up a literal experimental explosive school right there on the grounds. The leader of Section D actually joked that his goal was to just blow off people's hats. Well, when the war officially broke out and the first Codebreakers moved in, there was a massive clash. Imagine trying to do complex math while things are literally blowing up outside your window. The newly arriving Codebreakers constantly complained they were losing their concentration, so ultimately the explosives team had to pack up and relocate just so the Codebreakers could get some peace and quiet.
Moving on to Section 2, gathering the Codebreakers.
As the war escalated, so did the entire Bletchley operation. By January 1945, at the absolute peak of their efforts, there were nearly 9,000 personnel working at Bletchley and its outstations. And here is a vital statistic for you. An incredible 75% of this crucial workforce were women.
The reality on the ground was completely groundbreaking. Because so many men were deployed to fight, women, many of whom held advanced degrees in mathematics, physics, and languages, stepped up in a huge way. And they weren't just doing basic administrative tasks either. They were performing incredibly complex integral calculations, operating massive machinery, and translating decoded enemy signals. They were absolutely the engine driving the entire intelligence process.
But the overall demographics there were just really unique. The military quickly realized they needed people with strong lateral thinking skills. So recruitment went way beyond your traditional military men or formal mathematicians. We're talking university professors, classical scholars, piperologists, and even chess champions. Actually, in one genius move in 1941, the military asked the Daily Telegraph to organize a crossword competition. They secretly monitored the winners and then discreetly approached the top cryptic crossword solvers to offer them a quote-unquote particular type of work for the war effort. Incredible, right?
Okay, let's get into the tech in Section 3, cracking Enigma and Tunny.
So, the Allies basically faced a stark contrast in cryptographic threats. On one hand, you had the famous Enigma machine, used widely across the German Army, Air Force, and Navy. But on the other hand, you had a much more complex beast, the Lorenz cipher, which the British codenamed Tunny. Now, Tunny was an online teleprinter cipher machine with 12 rotors, and it was reserved almost entirely for the absolute highest level communications between the German High Command and their field commanders.
To combat the daily changing settings of Enigma, the brilliant minds at Bletchley engineered a device called the Bombes. Designed largely by Alan Turing, with some really vital contributions from Gordon Welchman, the Bombes was this massive, one-ton electromechanical machine. It systematically chewed through the daily rotor settings of the enemy's Enigma networks. At their peak, this machine allowed the staff to read up to 4,000 intercepted messages a single day.
But here's the crucial point. While the bomb was fantastic against Enigma, defeating the much more complex Tunny cipher required an entirely different leap in technology.
To solve this, a brilliant engineer named Tommy Flowers stepped up and built Colossus. When it arrived at Bletchley in 1943, Colossus made absolute history. It was literally the world's first programmable, digital, electronic computer. Operating these massive, room-sized machines, the codebreakers were finally able to decrypt the most sensitive, strategic messages of the German military elite, a real game-changer.
Which brings us to Section 4, the impact of Ultra.
The highly classified intelligence flowing out of Bletchley, known as Ultra, directly influenced massive turning points in the war. We're talking essential contributions to defeating German U-boats in the Battle of the Atlantic. It provided the operational plans that led to a major British naval victory at Cape Matitan. By intercepting supply routes to North Africa, they actually helped reduce the Luftwaffe's fuel stock by 90%, literally starving General Rommel's forces of fuel. And perhaps most astonishingly, just before the D-Day landings in Normandy, Ultra intelligence allowed the Allies to pinpoint the exact locations of 56 out of 58 German divisions on the Western Front.
When you add all of these incredible tactical and strategic advantages together, the ultimate impact is just staggering. Because of this massive operational advantage, experts have suggested that the codebreakers at Bletchley Park may have shortened the Second World War by as much as 2 whole years. There is no doubt that their secret work saved millions of lives in the process.
Now, let's look at Section 5, post-war secrecy and decline.
So, after all this heroism, what happened next? Absolute silence. Security was drilled into every single person who walked through those gates, and everyone signed the Official Secrets Act. Look at this 1942 security warning: do not talk by your own fireside. Because of this intense conditioning and serious legal obligation, most families never even knew their spouses or parents had done anything more than basic clerical work during the war. Thousands of men and women who helped shorten a global conflict simply went home and kept their mouths completely shut.
If we trace the timeline of this silence, it's actually pretty shocking. Code-breaking operations at Bletchley ended in 1946, but it wasn't until 1974, nearly 30 years later, with the publication of a book called The Ultra Secret, that public discussion of Bletchley Park's work finally became accepted. And get this, it wasn't until July 2009, over 60 years after the war ended, that the British government fully acknowledged the staff's contributions and officially awarded commemorative medals to the surviving veterans.
Finally, let's wrap up with Section 6, Legacy and Modern Museum. After the war, the site passed through various government hands and fell into a really deep decline. By 1991, this historic estate was actually at serious risk of being bulldozed and sold off for a housing development. No way, right? Fortunately, a dedicated group formed the Bletchley Park Trust to save it. Through massive fundraising efforts and public support, they rescued the whole site. Today, it stands as a thriving heritage museum. And the campus is also home to the National Museum of Computing. You can actually go there and see a working, rebuilt Bombe and a fully rebuilt Colossus computer in action.
Which leaves us with this final thought. Next time you look at the smartphone in your hand, or send an encrypted message to a friend, ask yourself, how much of our modern world of digital computing and cybersecurity owes its very existence to the secret halls of Bletchley Park? The urgent innovations forged by these brilliant silent codebreakers didn't just win a war, they absolutely laid the foundation for the digital age we all live in today. Thank you for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history behind the technology we take for granted.